All right, thanks.
Introduce yourself and talk.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for organizing the talk. Thanks everyone for coming. Thanks for the people watching online. So the topic of the talk was, as I think you said, syndicalism in the Nordic countries. That includes the discussion. I don't have so much to say about the countries outside of Sweden, so I will mainly stick to that. And as it happens, Sweden also has the only bigger syndicalist organization, which I currently represent as the General Secretary of this organization, which is the SAC, Sveriges Arbetares Centralorganisation, so the Central Organization of Workers in Sweden. So I will give a brief overview of the history of this organization and say a little bit about what we are doing currently, and maybe add a few things that I think we in the SAC are doing well, and things that we are maybe not doing so well, or where we just encounter different problems with the organizational structure we have in the times we are living in and in the labor market that we operate in. And then we can have a discussion. Feel free to interrupt my presentation whenever you think there is something that's not clear or you have a question. So the SAC was founded in 1910, early 20th century, when quite a lot of syndicalist organizations were founded internationally. The best known is probably the IWW, which was founded in the US in 1905. I will not go into that, but there's quite a lot of connection to Finland. When it comes to the IWW, historically, also to Sweden, Joe Hill, probably the most best known member of the IWW, was originally from Sweden. The SAC owns the building that he grew up in Gävle. There's one or two buildings that the organization owns. The other one is in Stockholm, where we have our offices. So when I speak of syndicalist organizations, what's the difference between a syndicalist labor union and other labor unions? I've recently expanded my brief characterization from 3 to 5 points. I don't really know why, maybe just to make a change, but it's maybe a little bit more clear. So the name originally, so syndicat in French just means labor union. So why did in the early 20th century a particular current within the labor movement use that to identify itself? That is the first main difference, which is a historical difference. So already in the beginning of the 20th century, there was a strong connection between a lot of labor unions and social democratic socialist parties, which syndicalists did not like. So there's an aspect of independence of political parties. If you even today apply for a position in the SAC, it's always very advantageous if you've never been a member of a political party or have no political party links, and hence the focus on that name, the syndicalist, that the union struggle as the center of your political organizing. Another aspect is that syndicalist organizations take all professions, all trades. There's sometimes a translation problem in English because people are so used to calling unions trade unions, but syndicalist unions are by definition no trade unions, because we don't organize along the lines of specific trades. We take all trades, so it's the syndicalist unions are labor unions. Another aspect is the federalist aspect. You could also say the the principle of direct democracy. So we have a very weak central leadership. My position sort of reflects that. General Secretary sounds good. I'm not saying it's bad, but okay, it sounds powerful. I have no decision-making powers at all in the union. We do have a central committee that makes decisions between our congresses, but all the major decisions are made at the congresses by representatives of our locals. And if there are major decisions to be made between congresses, there is a referendum where all the locals vote. So it's all very much based on local decision making. A fourth aspect, which a lot of people I think associate with syndicalism, direct action. So essentially, I guess you could say syndicalist unions are just more prone to, they're more combative and confrontational than other unions that rely, especially here in the Nordic countries, on the so-called Nordic model, which includes sort of ritual negotiations between union leadership and the employment agencies about collective bargaining agreements, and then hopefully there'll be peace on the labor market, which all of the people involved think is a sign of social progress. So we don't really believe that. I think pretty much everyone also working for the SAC gets excited when there is a labor struggle and we can get involved. And the final aspect is that historically, and we still have that in our Declaration of Principles, although it sounds like a very abstract goal, the goal of syndicalist unions is to contribute to the establishment of libertarian socialism. So that's a final distinguishing feature from other unions. With the SAC, so the foundation in 1910 happened essentially as a split from the mainstream labor unions in Sweden. In 1909, there was what they called a big strike in Sweden, a kind of general strike that lasted for some weeks. It was lost, and the more radical factions within the labor movement felt that the union leadership, one of the reasons was that the union leadership was too weak and not committed enough to that struggle, and so they left and founded this alternative organization called the SAC, which to this day is kind of seen as the pariah, I suppose, within the Swedish labor union movement. On occasion, doesn't happen so often, but on occasion you would have people from the mainstream union say that the SAC is not even part of the union movement because they have always sabotaged the Swedish model, or whatever the arguments are. But because of it, I mean, now even 114 years later, and even though the struggles aren't as pronounced and intense as they were in the beginning of the 20th century, there is still a very strong divide. It is easier for me as a representative of the SAC to talk to representatives of mainstream unions in the neighboring countries, whether it's here in Finland or Norway or Denmark, than it is in Sweden itself, just because there's that historical baggage that comes with it. The best times of the union were in the beginning, like pretty much all syndicalist unions in the 1920s and 30s. The membership was high for Swedish standards. 1930s it peaked at around 35,000 members. And most of those members were in some of the traditional Swedish industries, especially mining, forestry. Lots of members in the far north of Sweden. I think the biggest local in the 1920s was in Kiruna, a mining town in the far north, bigger than in all the major cities. Then things changed, as they did in many countries in with World War II. So Sweden, that was a difference though. While a lot of the syndicalist mass organizations in other countries, Spain, Germany, also France or Italy, were either were forced into exile or were outlawed, both because of fascism and the war. Since there was no fighting in Sweden, the SAC was able to continue even during that time, although under difficult conditions, because the SAC together with the Communist Party, were the only sort of major political players that were opposed to the Swedish coalition government during the war, kind of an emergency government that included all parties in parliament without the except for the communists. And so, for example, the paper which still exists to this day, the SAC newspaper Arbetaren, was often confiscated during the war because it criticized in the early years the sort of appeasement policies towards Nazi Germany, and there were labor camps. We're not talking about Siberia, but there were actual labor camps established for political dissidents during the war in Sweden. And so that weakened the structure of the union, but it continued to exist. But then, especially with the economic boom after World War II, where it seemed like the Swedish model was working really well, membership went down quite dramatically. And in the 60s, late 1960s, with the so-called New Left, I think there was a really significant shift when it comes to the member base, which went more and more from the traditional Swedish industries to a sort of, let's say, more activist, leftist audience that often joined more for ideological reasons than maybe a particular interest in union organizing. I'm generalizing here, but there was a clear shift that leads to a completely different makeup of the membership today, or a very different makeup of the membership today compared to 100 years ago. So today, for example, the three biggest locals that we have are Stockholm 1, Gothenburg 2, Malmö 3. And then there are different ones spread out around the country. There are, compared to how many there were historically, not that many. We have 25, I believe, right now. I think even in the year 2000, there were still over 100. And if you go back to the 1930s, there were hundreds of SAC locals across the country. So that was a really brief, the membership today. So I would say there are three main categories. One is this sort of more activist oriented, the ideological members that kind of join the SAC because they think it's a good thing. They don't necessarily maybe even need a union, students or people who are self-employed. So that's one part. Then there is a more traditional, just a more competitive part of the traditional Swedish working class, people who want to be able to do something about the problems at their job and not have a union representative to tell them that, well, you know, we've negotiated, we did the best we can do, you have to wait till the next negotiation round, or maybe go talk to your boss, and then not so much comes of it. So there's certainly an element of that. On occasion, we still have groups from mainstream unions joining as a group, going to the SAC, say from one workplace, because they feel that they're trying to deal with an issue there that their union is not helping them with, and then it's easier to get us involved. And then the third, which starts to become the biggest section of our membership, are migrant workers. So part of a new kind of underclass, I suppose, in Sweden, or some people would maybe call it the precariat, people who often don't have long-term employment. They're also undocumented workers, and we have had by far the biggest organizing success within this group of the proletariat in recent years. The organizational structure of the SAC, this can get very boring very quickly, so I'll make it simple, but it can be relevant depending on the discussion we'll have afterwards and certain words that I might use. So essentially, there are two forms of organization. One is geographic, and then the other one is industrial. So to become a member of the SAC, some people in the SAC would always correct me when I say that, but I still say member of the SAC because it's easier to understand. But some people, and this is part of the federal principle, some people will point out, no, this is not true. Individuals are members of locals, and then all the locals together are member organizations of the SAC. So you can never really be a member of the SAC. You can only be a member of the Stockholm local or the Malmö local or whatever. And so because, as I said before, the locals are the basis of the decision-making process in the SAC. So that's where, if you will, the sort of political or the decision-making power lies. So everyone, if you want to join the SAC, you have to join an SAC local. Otherwise, you're not a member of this organization. And then there's the industrial part, which in many ways seems more important, but which has less decision-making power, and which you do not necessarily have to be a part of to be part of the organization. It can be enough to just be part of a local. But then we have workplace sections and we have industrial branches. And those you can be part of if you work at a place where you have at least 2 colleagues, so you need 3 people to found your workplace section, and you need also at least 3 people to found an industrial branch. So the workplace section, as the name suggests, focuses on the place where you work, and again, that can be all trades. So if we have a section at a university, that would include cleaners as well as professors, everyone who shares the same workplace. And the industrial branches, that's based on your profession, on your trade. So for example, the biggest one we have in Stockholm, the construction workers, those are construction workers that are united in this branch, but their workplaces are very, very different. And we've changed also there. This is a big sort of internal discussion. There's some of these branches, for example, the one in Stockholm, they might also take on cases of construction workers in other parts of Sweden who belong to other locals, but this is where the discussion becomes complicated and not so interesting for people who are not part of the SAC. So I'll stop there, but this gives you a sort of a brief sense, hopefully, of how the organization is organized. What now, being the general secretary there and working 40 more hours a week with the organization, what do I think are things that are working, where the SAC can make a positive contribution to the class struggle in Sweden, and what are things that are difficult and challenging? So okay, what's good with the SAC? One, there's a clear alternative to the mainstream unions. So for a lot of people that if they don't agree, and in Sweden even more so than in the neighboring countries, because the SAC exists as an alternative, the mainstream unions are very closely tied to the Social Democratic Party. So if you feel for whatever reason uncomfortable with that, want to be part of a more independent, competitive union, you have an option. You can go to the SAC. So that's a good thing. Another thing is that, which we have proven in recent years with the organization of migrant workers, there's a stronger ability to organize sections of the working class that do not fit the traditional organizing model of the big unions, which is still very much based on big groups of workers assembling at big workplaces, having permanent employment, which allows for sort of regular structure also of the union and everything that comes with it, meetings and decision-making processes and everything that falls out of that frame. To this day, the big unions have a bigger problem with dealing with than we have, because there's more flexibility. It's also good that there is a more, as I said before, combative, confrontational union. So a number to illustrate that, even though today I didn't say that, today the SAC has about 4,000 members. And some of the big unions, although the numbers are coming down quickly, but some of the big unions in Sweden still have tens of thousands. If you look at the statistics of which union leads the number of strike hours per year, so this is, you take a member and they've striked so and so many hours per year, and you add all of this up, many years the SAC will lead that statistic. So even though we have very few members compared to the big unions. We have more, and we don't even strike that much, but we add up more strike hours per year, and much more cases also that we take to the labor court. So there's conflicts that very often the big unions would not even deal with, and we take them on. We would take them all the way to the labor courts if that's necessary. The SAC is a fairly significant, for a syndicalist union, a fairly significant voice in public debate. So it's not some, and that's because of the history and the historical weight, it's not some obscure group of people who have ideas and meet, meet in the basement or whatever. Like once a week, I don't want to sound disrespectful, but sometimes that's the conditions that other syndicalist groups have to work under. So because of its history, the SAC definitely among union people, everyone knows who the SAC is. There's a lot of media coverage. So you have, for example, when we had the reform of the strike law in Sweden in 2019, which pretty severely restricted the right to strike, there were big protests because in those cases, even though the leadership of the mainstream unions approved of that change, you have rank and file members who don't approve. So there was a fairly big popular resistance against that. And there the SAC, for example, it clearly had a pretty leading role. So you do have the possibility to influence public debate. And another factor is kind of like indirect. It doesn't have so much to do with the union itself, but because it's still a fairly big union and there are, even though, as I said before, officially, there are no real links to, definitely not political parties, but even not really officially to political initiatives. But because there is a lot of sort of personal overlap and also ideological overlap, a lot of groups within the broader left in Sweden will use the resources of the SAC for their activities. So they would use our offices to have meetings. They can apply for funding. We have Arbeter in the newspaper, other ways that they can also use to influence public debate. So it's the SAC is an important part, I would say, of the infrastructure of, we want to call it the autonomous or the extra parliamentary left in Sweden. What are the problems? And now I should say, especially if this eventually might end up online and other people in the SAC watch this, what I'm going to say now, that's very personal. These are no official. There are different thoughts within the union, but the problems that I personally see is one, bureaucracy. There is a huge bureaucratic apparatus that we deal with that I think partly comes with any kind of organization that exists for a long time and is fairly big. There's a certain dynamic. So all of this, in my experience, everything that I thought was true as a 16-year-old anarchist, and then later thought like, oh no, maybe that was all just a teenage prejudice. Now I think like, no, that is actually true. There is a certain dynamic in organizations that at a certain point gets in the way of creativity, also sort of commitment in a sense. A lot becomes about the organization more so than what the organization actually can do out there. And that's one part. The other part is that we've inherited an organizational structure that's still pretty much the same it was 100 years ago when we had 35,000 members. Now we have 4,000. So the structure we have is too big for the reality of the organization today. Again, in my opinion. What's related to that and why that's the case is yet another problem, which is that with all, I mean, the federalism and the direct democracy, that's all good, but it can be done in different ways, and the way it's done in the SAC leads to very long decision-making processes. If you want to, we have a Congress every 4th year. As I said before, important decisions are made at the Congress. Some important decisions need other important decisions that are made before that. So, for example, you have a certain idea of what we have 6 employees or 6 people that get money. They're not technically employees. I'm not even starting to explain what they technically are because it's way too complicated. And I only know the words in Swedish. So they're not employees, but they get compensated by the union because they work for the union full time. Those are 6 people. If you wanted to make a change of those, if, for example, we don't need a general secretary, it'd be much better with a workplace organizer to do something that you have in mind for the future. First, you have to make that change in the secretariat, and that could be at one Congress. And if you make another change of what those people actually are going to do, you got to wait technically 4 years to then say. So it's very prolonged decision-making processes, which leads to which means that the response to changes on the labor market can be reflected in your daily work, but it's not reflected in the way the organization is run. So another big problem, and this is nothing that has so much to do with the SAC itself, but even though we have some people in the central organization that get compensated for the work they do, historically, the organization was built on voluntary labor, and it's become, and this is not just the SAC, that's true for, you can talk to any sports club in Sweden, all clubs and associations that historically have been built on voluntary hours of problems recruiting people that put in those hours today. So that is a lot of the base, which also becomes a democratic problem, because a lot of the base that has carried this organization for a long time has been kind of eroded, and it's difficult to find people to do those jobs. And so sometimes you end up paying more people to do stuff, which again changes the dynamic. Sometimes we just don't have people. Committees, for example, we have no education committee, we have no propaganda. There's once upon a time there were tons of committees run by voluntary members putting in their hours voluntarily. A lot of that is gone, which also leads, which is a problem attached to that, to informal power structures, which is always the case when the democratic base of an organization kind of becomes weakened. It's very easy for informal power structures to emerge. We had a pretty big crisis in the union 2 years ago, which the cause of it was basically that. And then there's another aspect, which is more of a general question, and that maybe then can also lead to a discussion, because this is a question that I ask myself very often in relation to the neighboring countries, for example, Finland, but also Norway or Denmark, where you do not have a big syndicalist union, because quite clearly that doesn't mean that in those countries there are no labor activists who don't share similar principles. They are there, but they have to do other things. They don't go to the SAC, which in Sweden, those kind of people pretty much have done for 115 years. So you either try to be active in the rank and file of one of the mainstream unions, or you find some other kind of initiative, kind of half political project maybe, where you feel you can realize your ideas and principles. And it seems kind of like, well, you know, of course, it's a great thing to have an organization like the SAC. And again, I would say that, yes, generally it's a good thing. But one problem that also exists is that, as I said before, it leads to the fact that the mainstream unions are bereft of pretty much, not all, I will mention one example later, there are more, but there are very few sort of more radical initiatives there at all. So the social democratic hegemony there is very, very strong, because there's always been this alternative for other people. There's always been this place that you could point to also from mainstream union leadership. It's like, oh, you don't like the way we do things? You want to be more radical? Go to the syndicalists. They're over there. That's fine. They'll be happy to have you. So there's always been this sort of clear divide, and I've often asked myself, as like, maybe does that in some way, by marginalizing the community of radical labor organizers in a sense? Does that maybe, obviously it strengthens that organization, but does it strengthen class struggle overall? I'm not sure. So one example that kind of, I guess it depends on the way you look at it. It's either an argument against the SAC or it's an argument for the SAC. But so there's not that many strikes in Sweden right now. The Tesla strike gets a lot of attention because it's symbolically important. But it's not actually. It's about 50 people striking. It's anyway. The symbolic importance of that strike is more important than what's actually happening on the ground. Generally, there's not a lot of strikes. So even relatively small strikes tend to get a fair amount of attention. And a few years ago, there was one, also commuter trains, not in Stockholm, but in the south of Sweden. That was a successful strike. It had to do with layoffs and a lot of people that the company there wanted to lay off to make things more efficient and cheaper. They had to be rehired. And the strike was led pretty much by a person who had been an SAC member, very active SAC member for a long time, but had then switched, went to one of the mainstream unions because of his new job there, where he felt that there was no SAC presence, and he felt that he could organize better if he with his colleagues if he joined the same union that they were in, And so the argument against the SAC would be that, okay, that person was able to lead a strike of a dimension that he would have never been able to lead in the SAC, because we, especially in that particular industry, we don't have the membership. At the same time, if you talk to that person, he would say that without his training and without his experience in the SAC, he would not have been able to do this, because that's where all of his organizing training came from, and that's where his, again, competitive spirit comes from. So in that sense, you could say that, well, okay, but so you have more impact if you work in the mainstream unions. Yet on the other hand, it's like, even if it's more of a training ground, the SAC, even for that, obviously serves a certain purpose, because it trains radical labor organizers. So I think I'll stop somewhere there, and hopefully said something that someone else wants to say something about. But I don't know if there maybe first is, are there any questions? Something about this that you want to know more about, or please.
I'm not sure if I missed, but how many members you have at the moment?
About 4,000, a little less than 4,000, yes. And
it's,
to be honest, it's been, if you look at membership numbers, it's almost a continuous, it's downhill slide from the 1930s, but just recently, I think last year, but I mean, I guess you could say, well, it's fairly easy with those numbers. Last year, well, the big unions all lost members. Our membership increased by, I think, 20% or something last year. So, sorry, you had a follow-up question?
Yeah, what about the legal support? Like, do you have any lawyers?
Yes. So we have one lawyer. When I said before, there are 6 people in the central organization which get paid, who I do not want to call employees. One of them is a lawyer. And so that's both to give advice. The role of that person should be more, actually, it's kind of training negotiators in the locals, and be there if they need have like maybe main contact for them if they need legal advice, because a lot of our structure now is, as I said before, has been weakened. It happens more and more often that individual members have direct contact with that person because they're part of a local where they don't have any negotiators or even can help them. But the bigger locals, like Stockholm, for example, they have a number of, none of them is employed 100%, but they have at least 2 or 3 lawyers working for them, varying between 20 and 80% or something. So yes, absolutely. And I would say the Stockholm, when I say that we've had success in organizing migrant laborers, the Stockholm local accounts for 80 to 90% of that. And of that amount, it's 70 to 80% in construction. So that's by far our biggest group. Any other questions?
You have like same status on the workplace according to the law as other labor organizations.
Yeah. That's fairly easy in Sweden. I mean, you can. So technically, even the workplace section is its own little union. You just need 3 people, and you start that. So the formal stuff is fairly easy, but then you have to fill that with content and knowledge but the status is exactly the same. So we have, for example, all the labor law applies. So according to Swedish labor law, if a union demands from a boss that they come in for a negotiation because they represent one of their workers who has a problem, then they have to come and negotiate within 2 weeks. And that's one thing that we use a lot, especially the Stockholm local. And a lot of the cases I was talking about the labor court before, a lot of the cases are solved within us because of the negotiations. They never have to go to court. So, yes.
Yeah, about the agreements, like the
collective bargaining
agreements,
yeah.
Like does it work in Sweden that every organization has a different one? Does it cover just the workers which are organized, or does it cover the whole worker?
It covers the workplace. So if you and that's still a high number in Sweden, like a pretty high number of especially bigger workplaces. Pretty much all of them, except for example Tesla, which is what the strike is about. But in general, bigger workplaces all have collective agreements, and those collective agreements then will apply to all workers at that workplace, regardless of whether they are part of the union that signed the collective agreement or not.
So they are not like industry based; they are like locally based, or like
it's sort of a combination. It's sort of a combination there, but they are not which the model that you have in certain other countries. I'm not sure about Finland. You don't have leadership signing collective bargaining agreements that then cover the entire industry. Yes. So this, you're right. So I know some of the other European countries have that too. That you don't have that in Sweden.
But it's changing now, and also like not all the employers join a union of employers. That's
right.
The official kind of that was make it easy to make this like whole coverage for the whole industry. So if, for example, another company start to compete in the same, let's say in Helsinki with the trams, now they are forced to apply by the same rules. So that means that they cannot compete, for example, with the salaries.
Yes.
Like we come here and we offer the workers less money or more money. So there is some limits to the.
I mean, that is also that in Sweden it's complicated, but there is certain levels. So certain collective agreements set a certain level, especially when it comes to salaries. So you cannot sign others that would bring the salary down. So there are laws like that. But what's one thing that's, if for people who are interested in that kind of stuff, a difference is if you're a workplace and there's a collective agreement and you are part of the union that signed the collective agreement as opposed to other workers who are not. There's no difference. Everything that's in the agreement applies to all workers. But, for example, when it comes to the next round of negotiations, it's only the union that represents some of the workers that will do the negotiations. So if you're not part of that union, you have no one. You can just hope that they will negotiate something that will work for you. And this is where For example, a few years ago, I didn't mention that, I should. There is one union in Sweden that we have close relationship with because they were also split from one of the mainstream unions, and that's the Hamnarbetarförbundet, dock workers union, mainly based in Gothenburg. And there was again, fairly, for Swedish standards, fairly big strike a few years ago at the port in Gothenburg, which only was about that. So they wanted their own collective agreement, pretty much identical to the one that existed there, which was signed by Transport, which is the main union that this other union had split from, because they wanted to be on the bargaining table. And then it's also about certain representatives that only the union that has signed the contract can have. So there are differences that can cause, like in that case, labor struggles. But and the SAC historically hasn't signed. There might be some historic exceptions, but very few. Hasn't signed collective agreements because they always imply a so-called peace agreement. So once you've signed it, very often you sign away the rights to strike or industrial action, especially in the Swedish context you do, especially now. But because the strike law now is so strict that you essentially can only go on strike when it's about collective agreements, when you renegotiate. There is, as a strategic question, I think that there is more openness to signing collective agreements just because it allows you to enter a conflict while you're doing it or when it has to be renewed.
Yeah, here is like once the collective agreement has like expired, it's like open range. Like you cannot get fined. So there are two occasions where you cannot get fined, like as a union here is like when the collective agreement is due, then you can start like striking to push for the agreement, and there is not like economical consequences for the union.
Right.
And another is like the political strikes,
yes,
which has been still is like possible, but then now they just limited the solidarity strikes to 1 day. But I don't know, still is open. Can you make 5 solidarity strikes for very niche and put them all together? Probably not, but that might be a possibility. But still is not.
So this is the latest in Sweden. So if we to illustrate everything that you've said now, put it in the Swedish context. So the Tesla strike is possible because there is no collective agreement at that place, and so the people are striking for a collective agreement. That's still legal. It's also still legal that once you have such a strike, other unions can go on strike in solidarity, which has happened quite a lot in Sweden. But this is now the newest thing that they want to take away. It's not at a point where I think that's a real possibility now, because the Social Democrats and LO are not on the side of the employers. But the government, for example, they would be very open to do that. So that might be the next sort of step. And from what I understand, and I don't know the details, but some of the strikes that you've seen in Finland last year, in context of all the anti-government protests, a lot of it had to do with, I think, the proposal in Finland to adapt a lot of the Swedish law, making, for example, political strikes more difficult. They're not impossible in Sweden, but they're very difficult.
Yes, it was in springtime.
Yes.
Yeah, but there was, I had Daniel to make a small introduction also. You'd like to bring now.
Right, sorry, I wasn't familiar with the exact plan. Please.
All right. So, hello to everyone here and online. I'm Daniel Fernández, and I'm a member of the local branch of GHL. It's like mainly the public workers union, and I'm a member of the local branch of the tram and metro drivers here in Helsinki. And I'm also a media freelancer, so I'm also a member of A-ryhmä, which is not a union but is an organization which is a member of Journalistiliitto, which is like the union for the journalists. And this union is actually, it does not belong to any union confederation because they want to be like non-partisan. So GHL belongs to the Finnish Union Confederation, SAC, and there I just became a member of the SAC parliament, and yeah, we just have a meeting first meeting was in June, and we are having the next meeting in November, and it works in a totally different way than the GHL parliament, and in a different way that local branches. I think one of the main things why I was asked to join this meeting, this conversation with Gabriel, was that I was also involved with the campaign against again, I don't have the correct name in English. It was not a privatization, but we used to have this tram and metro driving, or the whole business model. It was a part of the city of Helsinki, and now is a private company which is owned 100% by the city of Helsinki. So that got some of our perks, let's say perks, and yeah, the idea was that other cities like Vantaa and Espoo can buy part of the company for themselves, so they will be more involved in the organizing of the public transport and not like just pay for it as a kind of customer, as we started to drive metro to Espoo, and also with this fast track, which is kind of faster tram, some hybrid in between metro and traditional tram, and now they are starting to do it finally also in Vantaa, so there will be more lines, and there are some bigger projects like outside the city of Helsinki, like maybe one tram going to Lohja at some point if they build the fast track, train track from Helsinki to Turku. Yeah, weird things happening, but anyway, if we stay in the Helsinki area, like I helped some of the workers of some tram drivers, mainly tram drivers. There were some also like metro drivers, to start a public campaign about the privatization project, or the turning the public service into a publicly owned company, which is what we are now. So some of the workers, me myself included, like we thought that the union hadn't been able or willing, interested in making this a public thing to all the people living in Helsinki, that there are these movements happening and we don't really know why. And a model which has been working almost 100 years, okay. Helsinki Tram started as a private company for an industrialist in Munkkiniemi. So, and then the city of Helsinki bought it and so on. But it has happened in many cities like that. But why do we want to? This was not the first time that they were trying to make it a private company. they have been trying it for 15-20 years, but they were not able to kind of express it in a way that the city of Helsinki was willing to approve. So before we were able to stop it, but now seems that there was a willingness between all the not all, but most of the political parties, that they saw that privatization or turning the public sector service into a publicly owned company is a good thing, because we can get money from the banks to make big infrastructure programs and projects, and that's what happened. They didn't say it like that before, but now it's like publicly admitted that this is the case. So we turned from the public transport service into a kind of PR grinder office, like making big plans to put rails everywhere, so the prices of the new buildings rise, and this is good business and people is happy because they don't have to drive their own cars. I think that's a good thing, sure, but we could have done it still as a public service. So again, the campaign started like that, like some workers want to make it public, and they felt that the local branch and the Helsinki area or southern area office of the union, GHL, they were not willing to make it public or make a campaign about it and try to pressure politicians not to do this. They have been meeting like in cabinets with politicians and trying to lobby them and stuff like that, like behind the scenes, but nothing was public. So when we started, like, it was very interesting, like people had no idea, even though the plans had been like working for 2 years already. Then it came this Raide ammattilaiset as like the former train section or train union, which just a few years ago joined GHL also, so they brought in a lot of muscle, like economically and also like in potentially strike capabilities all around Finland, not just in Helsinki. So hello to them. Here they did not communicate with the local branch that they were negotiating in our behalf, but without us. That was really nice. So yeah, there were some, let's say, communication problems inside the union, and definitely the workers were not properly like informed what was happening, and definitely the general public did not know what was happening. So we had this open chat for all the local branch members where we were having discussions, and then some people say like, hey, so we start to collect signs, like signing a petition to bring to the bosses and maybe to the city of Helsinki to tell them that we are not happy with this, because the idea that our former CEO then was spreading that all the workers were like totally happy with this. So apparently for them was a surprise that we were not. I find, of course, very hard to believe all this. I think it's just what they say publicly, because there is always like a lot of contacts and a lot of overlapping and like meetings in different, like it's very hard for me to believe that the politicians didn't know that even the political we have this thing in Finnish is like poliittinen ohjaus, is like there are political party appointed members of kind of governmental structure on top of the public services. So we had that, and they were like, oh, we thought that everybody was happy and willing to turn into a company. Well, you didn't ask us, you asked the CEO. So that was a big kind of conflict. And I don't know, we just started too late. We have few months. We gathered several thousand followers in social media. There were some interviews with local papers and stuff like that, and then we even decided, okay, let's meet politicians. Some of them, or most of them, we met like online, and that was very interesting experience for me and for all the people involved. And one thing that we did not expect was that our local branch didn't want to touch us. They didn't want to communicate with us. They didn't want to have anything at all to do with us. And that's because we broke the game. We broke the official, like, we don't do things like that in Finland. You don't overstep.
Just a quick question, when
Yeah.
you say us, so that's a group of you and some
Workers.
colleagues who...
Yeah, colleagues,
Okay.
yes. And actually at that point, I was also a member of our local branch government. So my experience was that my ideas and suggestions were not taken very seriously. There were always some sort of like, well, these rules say that we cannot do that, or this has not been done before, and there were always all kind of stuff or all kind of ideas. So at a certain point, with these people, like my workmates, were like making these comments that we should make this public. Okay, so I was like, I'm not the only one, and then I say, I can help. So it was like less than 24 hours that I was receiving all kind of messages, and informally. So they didn't send me messages, but I know that there were some private chats where they were going some information, and then I got involved, that kind of, okay, not surprised, but they were like super pissed. The employer was super pissed. The politicians were like shocked, like, who is these people who want to talk with me? They are not the official union members, and we didn't talk with the left wing, with Vasemmistoliitto, because they were like totally against the privatization, so they were like happy to help. So we decided that we have very few people involved, so we have to prioritize. Okay, let's talk with the right wing, let's talk with the Greens, let's talk with the big groups who can actually make a difference in the vote, because minority politicians or minority political parties, they cannot move, like they always can oppose. That's okay for them, but Social Democratic, the Greens, this Kokoomus, and even the True Finns, we met all of them. They were willing to listen. They were very like shocked about that they were talking to us, and they were like, of course, not answering any questions that we had. We have limited information and we don't know, and we have here this and that, and all this is new. But there was one thing, like, it was kind of annoying. It didn't came from, I have to say, like, not from the Social Democrats, but all the rest of the workers of the politicians were like, you cannot be serious that there is gonna be like people leaving, workers leaving. Like, where are you going? where will you go? You don't have studies. Like, what are you saying? So they didn't believe it. So when it happened, then 100 drivers left. Some of the bosses left, and like it was much bigger than we expected. And okay, I left to study, and then I came back, but still it was like, and they were like, our bosses were publicly saying that these are normal levels. Well, 700 drivers, 100 leave like in 1 year, that's not normal. Of course, they were thinking about, well, we have like 1,200 workers with the technicians and the people making the infrastructure, people working in the office. So, okay, the percentage is so much lower, but we were not able to stop the privatization, of course. But what I was very happy to see was that people, both who were like members of the local branch and people who were from a different union, also with people who did not belong to any union because they had some issues with members. That's very often the case, that there are some crashes with people, so they leave and they don't want to hear anything about that, or there are ideology problems that I will never belong to the union. Okay, whatever. They were also signing, and they were happy that we were doing this thing. And then after the campaign ended and we turned into a publicly owned or privately owned company, there has been some more like small struggles, mainly about timetable and about like overwork, payments and stuff. And it has been very interesting to see like people organizing, like jumping over the union, the local branch. For instance, the overwork payments. During the negotiations for the change of structure, they were saying all the time like, your payment will not be decreased. It's for sure that it's going to stay the same. Okay, then we have this like local agreement about the overtime that was due, so it dropped to half. So instead of getting double pay for staying more hours to work, you were getting like half the pay. And there was, yeah, well, that's like your income, which has been reduced, but it's not the payment, it's not the salary. So they were, it's funny, all these little words that really make a change. So the people just say like, unofficially, we are not going to do any overwork. So what it followed was that there were like hundreds of trams cancelled. It was day after day after day. There were several weeks. So people was really pissed in the street because they were all late. And the union, the employer was like saying to the union, why do you introduce this like thing that you will not work over? We didn't do anything. It were the workers. You cannot force them, but we didn't do anything. But the negotiations were very fast after that. So it's like, okay, you have these kind of black swans or wild horses, whatever you call it, like wild cards that are like making trouble in the workplace, but then that trouble is helping the official union to make faster deals and to make better deals for the workers. So what's the problem? Why don't you want to touch us even with a stick, you know? So how the union, the official union, reacted to this movement was for most of people very, very, very annoying. not just for the active people, also for the people who were just like talking to us, and they were like, why? No, I don't know, ask you, there are the names and the telephone numbers, you can contact them and ask them. Why is it that? Yeah. So I think that's shorter version of this campaign. Is there any questions about this or about ASAC or?
So why does this reduce of overtime pay? Why did it happen after this changing to a company? Were there any disputes before that? I guess there must have been these kind of disputes even before.
Yeah, well, the thing is that the local agreement that we have inside the company or the former HQ Hall, it was due. So the agreement, the basic agreement, did not include such a rise in the hours. So we have to renegotiate it in the company after it was due. That was why it dropped. It dropped to the normal levels, but we have a better deal, so we have to deal it again.
Okay.
And the people was really pissed, and they reacted in a week. Like all the overdue time was like blocked by the workers themselves. That was not like unions can block it, but that was not the case in this case. It was just like the time was due for that deal. It was a local paikallisneuvottelu. It was a local deal.
Okay. So did the HKL, did it just pay more than it should have paid somehow, or?
Kind of, yes. We had that deal that we will get very nice like overwork hourly paid, and that was due. So they have to renegotiate it, but the negotiations were very fast because people were not willing to do any overdue, any overwork.
Yeah, so that's clear. Were there other things that the company, in which way the company was worse?
No, actually, we have this agreement between Palta and Raideammattilaiset is much better than what we had before with the city of Helsinki. So that was a thing that has been like interesting to see. That is a better deal actually.
Okay.
That's not very common that are better deals after you are privatized. But we have lost like as worker of the city of Helsinki, you usually have lower salary that working in private sector. So we had access to the city of Helsinki employers bank system, which had very nice deals for loans for getting your first house or things like that.
And that you don't have anymore?
No, they could have done it, but they didn't do it.
Okay.
So that was a very big minus, and they are still struggling with a lack of workers. Like they have been like teaching new tram drivers and metro drivers. Like tram drivers is like 35 new tram drivers 4 times a year. That's 120 about, and sometimes 2/3 of the course, like the people who became tram drivers, they quit or they get fired for whatever reason. So there are some courses that most of the people stay, but there have been many courses where half of the course just leave at some point, because like in 6 months, because they see that, well, this is not an easy job to do. So
But was that different than before? The job is the same in a way.
yeah, well, I can tell you, like, the job is not the same that it was in 2008 when I came. It's definitely not the same than in 1985 when some of the people who are still working came. Yeah. So we have very hard timetables. City of Helsinki is in a constant expansion and repairing the streets, so those are not taken into account in the timetables. There is people with these electrical scooters doing all kind of weird stuff, and I think it has become more difficult of a job with the time.
That's directly, that's privatization or companization is not due to scooter drivers. So
No. But about that is, I don't see that there has been many differences. It's like the expansion of the work. Like we will be opening hundreds of kilometers of new rails. So at the same time that they are like teaching new drivers, they are teaching new bosses and under bosses and top bosses. So they are expanding all the time. We are really not sure what is going to happen. We don't know what is going to happen with the people working in the halls where we keep the trams. They are also like, it's very uncertain what is going to be the job in the future. There are several stuff like that.
So I want to ask, is the uncertainty, which is bigger problem, the uncertainty or the decrease in pay, or what is the proportion of the problem? Is it somehow that you were not listened, or you were told what is going to happen when this transition came? That's the problem, and the uncertainty of future. You thought about this new depots or something like that. The changes, so that causes uncertainty. That's a problem.
The uncertainty is definitely more of a problem, because the money is not a problem, because we got that deal very fast. Okay. That's done already. That's okay. The main problem is that uncertainty and like ever increasing activities and changing, and let's press this button here and let's make this a bit faster and let's reduce the time that you can rest in between drives and all kind of these kind of things, and that you don't know what is going to happen. You don't know what is going to be, what they're going to do, what they're going to introduce next. It's like all the time changing very fast. You have another question?
Yeah, thanks. I was about to ask, like, what do you think? Do you see there's a need for like have similar kind of union structure than the SAC to represent those workers who are dissatisfied with how the other labor unions function at the moment?
There are like both sides, I think. Like there are some studies ordered by this confederation, this SAC, where even people who are I'm talking about like basic union members, right-wing members, and even people who do not belong to the union, they think it's a good idea that there are these union representatives, and the unions are like doing the job that they have been doing. But at the same time, I see that if we keep on doing the things as they have been done till now, the decrease of union members has lasted for last 20 years, 30 years. It's just going down. There are very big economical problems in the unions and confederations. But it still seems that the people who can, because in these unions it's not like us as AC, that you don't have real power, you are like a representative, but there is a bigger group of people making decisions. In the mainstream unions, the power is concentrated. Most of it is like, well, there are these kind of bureaucratic things that you have to like, I don't know if you follow that some of the ASACO, there are some employee reduction, and some of the members of the parliamentary section where I'm myself were like angered not by the thing itself, just by the fact that we were not even informed that this was like even being discussed, that possibility, because they don't have to talk to us. It's a governmental decision, and they have the possibility of do it, but they don't have to contact with us. And also it's like the main negotiations, the big negotiators sign the papers. They don't have to consult with all the union members. They have to consult with the government of the unions which belong to the federation, and then they will also like ask to the local branches. But it has become pretty bureaucratic and pretty like, it's almost like done job, you know. There is very, very seldom is gonna be one or two workers in a local branch like opposing the deals, because there is a lot of pressure, and most of the union members are not like political active. They just want to get paid once a month or twice a month and do their life, and you know. So yeah, I think like we can maybe discuss this now, but I see very hard to get like so-called normal workers, people who are not politically active, to become members of a radical union or a syndicalist union at the moment in Finland. Even if that happens, I think that in the meantime, people who are politically motivated or interested in political struggles or how society in general works, they should be active in their local branches and in the unions that we have now working, because you can learn a lot inside of unions. You can try to struggle inside the union. You are probably gonna be unsuccessful, but you can make also like good partners, and you can learn a lot of things that then you can move to a more radical situation or union or syndicate. And then again, like if we have like experience in organizing all kind of activities, they don't have that experience in the mainstream unions. There are people who have been studying to become union organizers, but they haven't organized any radical action, and it's not allowed to do it. It just have not been done. But you can do it if you get enough people behind the idea.
I just one comment, because you said that it seemed strange that you could point to union leadership and say, but look, because of what we have done, we've got a better deal, or this is something positive, but they didn't want to, they distanced themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know about Finland, but the mentality in Sweden simply is that I think the leadership of the mainstream unions, they see their main task or their main duty is to uphold a certain institutional system that they are part of. That is more important than a certain group of workers that has a problem. Sure, if they can help, that's fine, but not that. That's much less important. So it's all about, as soon as you in some way step out of that model or do something different, you undermine this model, and you also sort of delegitimize leadership.
Yeah.
And so you can point to as many successes as you want. It's like, yes, fine, but you did it in a way you're not supposed to do it. That's the bottom line.
Yeah. And I knew like something like that might happen, but it was like, it's still baffling to me, like to talk to some people and like make, it doesn't matter how the list of facts why this worked and why your old system is not working, it doesn't matter because they are like also in the political party system, and some people involved at that time in my local branch, now they have gear up, they are in the next level, and you see them then in the next elections again trying to get into some. So there are like very significant and obvious like confrontation of interest, but they just tell you, no, well, on Mondays I have this cup and I'm a union member, and then on Tuesdays I'm a political party member and I do totally different decisions. That's not a problem. This is Finland, this is a small country, very few active people, so we have to do it like that. Which of course I think is bullshit, but
yeah, you can move also, we can have a like general discussion if you still want to move more close to the microphone.
Okay, I can do that. No, I just wanted to add one thing, which is yes, okay. Because that, I think, so everything that you said, plus I think there is, and I hinted at that there is this kind of bureaucratic mentality that affects people, and that happens even within our own union. So there could be, for example, I was talking about this industrial branch of construction workers in Stockholm, which is by far the most successful organizing we have. There are people in the union who are critical of it because it hasn't followed a certain historical protocol that they think syndicalist organizing should follow, which is that an industrial branch should be built on workplace sections. This is where it starts, so you need workplace sections, and then they built an industrial branch. And without the workplace sections, you don't have the foundation that you need. I think this is not, I mean, they're not making this up. I would say that, if you go back to the 30s, 50s or whatever, that there was a certain reason why this model was implemented. But now, especially with construction workers migrant workers who change the workplace all the time, or only in the country few months, that model doesn't really work. So if they had used that, they would have never had the success that they're having now. So even within our radical union, there are voices that are critical because they didn't follow a certain protocol. And I think this sort of, if I stick to the term, this bureaucratic mentality is even more pronounced in these very institutionalized unions. But now I just continue. Just a question. Yeah. But did you notice any? So when did all this happen? Like 2 years ago, or
2 years ago ended the process to make this public company started in, not public company is probably not the right term, but started at the end of 2018, and the campaign was in 2020.
Has there any, would you say that, because you're still a member of the same union?
Yeah.
Has there any traces of this? Have there been any changes?
You mean in the local branch, in how the local branch behaves, or?
Yes, or even higher up, probably not, but
not to my knowledge.
Okay.
I won't. Publicly, I won't go into details.
Okay. And while you were doing this, was there any support from other unions or workers or local branches?
There were like individuals, like people I know from other unions, other branches. Like we are like, once you are like active in an official union, like you start to go to courses and you start to interact with other people, and through like personal connections. But I cannot recall that there were like official union like kind of coming out and expressing solidarity with our struggle, and I don't know like why. Was it like that's not how you are supposed to do things, or is probably a thing? Actually, I'm making a mistake, because maybe Stara, which is like the branch or the company which is making like parks and fixing parks and stuff in Helsinki, among like some general infrastructure, I think they might have even expressed publicly like support for it, but I'm not quite sure at the moment. But definitely not like GHL as such. They didn't move a finger.
I'm actually thinking there's one other thing just related to support of union conflicts or struggles. Something I could have added to the plus points of the SAC. I think, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that whenever I go to countries also, whether that's Norway or Denmark or Finland, and you talk to people who are active, because this is also where some of the support could come from, or maybe did come from just political activists, not union people, but then people in the autonomous left of other countries tell me, well, yeah, but union struggles, no one's really interested in that. It could be, anti-fascism, the climate crisis. Like for the autonomous left, union stuff is not so interesting. I think there's a difference to Sweden because of what I said, the SAC providing a certain infrastructure for this whole scene. So union struggles being a part of this is, I think, more evident for a lot of people because the SAC exists. Yes.
Actually, like we had official union strike. It was like 2 days, 2 or 3 days. I can't recall now, but I think 2 days it was. A-ryhmä came to make a visit, and then some people arrived to different places where there were these pickets, like the strikers or people like kind of keeping an eye that no trams are leaving the halls. Okay. But there were some of these, and some of the people which were like from the official union, and they were like losing their nuts totally because they are not accustomed to that anymore. That's very, very funny. Like that they like were surprised that who is these people? Why are they bringing us like muffins and hot coffee? And they were like, what is happening? So it was really, really bizarre. Yeah. And the bosses were definitely like they have anxiety about like people who were not workers coming to show solidarity to the places. They were like really having problem with that. It was all new, and I think it was a good experience in general, but then there were of course some darker times at some point.
Yeah, I think maybe already like 1.5 hours people are maybe getting tired, but I'm a bit more interested about this construction workers situation in Sweden, because it's kind of a new success to the general tendency. So would you like to tell a bit more about this campaign? Like was it targeting some particular employer or a construction site, or what kind of? I think it might be a difference that in Finland this general binding contract makes more difference, like more, it's more important. There is not much local contracts. There have been even, I think it might have been some reform in Sweden. Sweden also, I guess, maybe the general binding contracts were more important in the past. past, and actually this neoliberal
Yes.
tendency against them might have been also useful for the syndicalists.
Yes.
But in Finland, there has been, like, anarchists have been criticizing the general abiding, and actually there has been some kind of anarchist attempts to get rid of the system, even if it's generally pushed by the employers. But it seems like it's also opening pathways for more radical organizing, to have more localized contracts.
So I think it doesn't. I mean that is a very interesting issue, and I agree with that. I don't think it had so much to do with the construction workers organizing that we have done in Stockholm. I think another aspect that you mentioned was more important there, and that is neoliberalism, which I believe that in Sweden, also because of the center-right government between 2006 and 2014, was accelerated even more strongly than in the neighboring countries, plus that Sweden is bigger, there is a bigger industry, and so I think what in Sweden is called skuggsamhället, the shadow society, also in the economy, is, I assume, bigger than in some of the other countries. So because often when I talk to people, I also met someone here from the Construction Workers Union yesterday, and you talk about the problem, it seems like the problems structurally are very similar, just that maybe in Sweden it's always a little bit worse, just in terms of temp agencies and subcontractors and the overlap also between, especially in the construction industry, between that and basically just organized crime down to human trafficking. Arbetslivskriminalitet is a very big topic in Sweden now. And so in this shadow society, you have, especially in construction, a lot of workers who basically don't get the salaries they're promised, their working conditions are very poor, they don't get safety equipment, all sorts of things. Now, why were we successful in organizing there? As it often is, quite random reasons, really. So at the beginning of this organizational success stand really two people. One of them is a writer, originally Swedish, speaks Russian well enough to pass as a Russian speaker for people who don't speak Russian. And so essentially he did undercover work as I'm not sure about the nationality he took, it might have been Ukrainian anyway. Was working as a berry picker in the far north and wrote a book about that, and then worked as a construction worker in Stockholm for I think close to a year and wrote a book about that. And we don't have really people who are able to organize in the north with the berry picking, but in Stockholm we then connected with one of the best organizers that we have in our union, who said that, well, a lot of the things that you're writing about we could actually do something about through our union. And that's how these people essentially started Solidariska byggare, so this industrial branch of construction workers there. And then because of the intro through this Russian-speaking person, almost all of those members are Russian speakers from former Soviet republics. So quite a lot from the Ukraine, but also from Uzbekistan and a whole bunch of other countries. And I say that because, for example, there's a lot of Polish construction workers in Stockholm. Hardly any of them are members. So it really is that community connection, especially with Ukrainians, is a very strong aspect of why that's working. But then also it spreads, and again to other. I mean, we have a fairly big branch also of cleaners. So they are all, well, the construction workers are basically all male and Russian speaking. The cleaners are almost all female and from Latin America. And again, that's also related because we have some people originally from Latin America who have been in Sweden for a long time, who speak the language. And so those community elements are very, very important. So I think nowadays, from what I understand, like also social media networks, if you're especially if you're Ukrainian and a construction worker in Stockholm, you come to the SAC. That's kind of what your community members tell you. Like that is the union that will help you. And then I think there are some other aspects, and that's also talking to people from mainstream unions, for example in Denmark, 3F or 3F, that have made kind of efforts to organize the migrant workforce in construction, but with limited success. And again, I think that's often because they take a certain model union organizing model that has worked for a long time and that they want to use in this case as well, which especially for people who often are very skeptical of unions, as I guess a lot of people from the former Soviet republics are, not necessarily used to the Swedish form of organizing in terms of, it's all about whatever, very boring meetings. And so you have to, also people are available kind of a lot, not individuals 24/7, but people organizing in Stockholm divide that up. So there are numbers that you can call pretty much at any time, not just on Wednesdays between 2 and 4 p.m. or something. So I think you have to make certain, you have to adapt those models. That's also part of the success. So yeah, I don't know if that was part of an answer to the question, but.
Yeah, is there any more?
Yeah, about the SAC, is the SAC trying actively to challenge the hegemony or the policies of the mainstream social development movements, or is there conflicts between SAC and other unions, or is it more like peaceful coexistence or symbiotic relations?
Oh, very interesting question. I guess it goes in cycles. I would say you could point at certain years where it's more of a peaceful coexistence, and you meet some of the representatives at certain congresses and they're like, oh yeah, syndicalists, oh you're still around, oh, okay, so you can have those kind of encounters. But then in other times, the tones, the rhetoric can be very different. I mean, there are books that came out not long ago, 15 years ago, about the SAC being compared to biker gangs, and it can be. It depends on where you're at, I guess, in the class struggle. Like so both. And I mean, from our side, I'm actually, I think, one of the people. Maybe because I'm not originally from Sweden, I don't know. I'm not so interested. I rather talk about what we do than talk bad about the mainstream unions. I mean, that's always part of the discussion. Like, and also, often, okay, what's the difference and why should you join the SSC? So it's hard to get around that. But I don't know. I don't want to sit here and spend half the time complaining about all the bad things that Swedish mainstream unions do. They kind of do what they do, and if it's relevant, as I say, the bureaucratic stuff and why do they react to rebellious members in a certain way, then it's relevant. When it's relevant, I will. But so I don't do that. But I think historically, yes, a lot of people in the SAC. I mean, I guess there I would include myself. I mean, it is an alternative. That's how it was founded. It is a radical alternative to the mainstream unions, and we are kind of proud of that, and it's part of the identity. And so, yes, but how strongly that is pronounced or how that affects public discourse, that I think very much goes in cycles. Like now, for example, it's pretty interesting the situation with the industrial branch, kind of what we see, because it is really, it's much more successful in organizing a certain section of the working class than any of the mainstream unions have. And you can tell that there is, like Byggnads, so that the mainstream construction workers union, you know that they don't like it, but the success is so big, which is also reflected in pretty positive media coverage. by mainstream media in Sweden. They kind of grudgingly have to acknowledge that. So that's a kind of interesting dynamic right now, where it's like, okay, you know when you meet them, they're not really happy, but they have to say, oh, this is quite impressive that you got all these Ukrainian members. And so that's also part of the relationship.
Yeah, I could add to this, like when we were campaigning, we definitely like discussed that we don't talk like bad about the union because they were the ones negotiating after all. So we didn't bring to the public that we were like really struggling to have connections. We got support from some people, from people who were like active in the negotiation, but there was not official connection. And definitely the local branch made clear that by not answering emails, like they didn't want to have anything to do with us, but we didn't feel that we don't get any. That's not important now. Now the campaign is about bringing to the public this situation and try to make possible to stop it, or maybe at least make a like better negotiations for us in the future. So we didn't have that kind of like talking bad about the other groups. That definitely in private I had to listen from the other side. I had to listen how bad idea this was. So that maybe the confrontational like attitude that they had, that was the surprise for me, because they usually in public they are like the ones that stay cool and they are like responsible negotiators and blah blah blah, but in private they were like really aggressive to me and to the whole idea that we were pulling. So yeah.
Okay, I guess people are exhausted.
It's the 2-hour mark. That's a pretty
Yeah. So yeah, thanks for joining. Hope to see some people next week also.